opportunity to talk about Darden's test flexibility and test waiver process. It's a topic I'm really passionate about and happy to give my best advice to applicants who are considering a test waiver. So basically, the inception of having more flexibility around standardized tests and a test waiver process was an acknowledgement that we are ultimately looking for high impact leaders to come to Darden and to go out and be impactful in their careers. Not all stellar applicants are stellar standardized test takers. Having been in the industry or affiliated with the industry for 30 years, I felt that the emphasis on the GMAT and GRE was a little too amplified. And in this day and age, there are multiple ways an applicant can demonstrate academic readiness for Darden. So historically, we in schools would look at an undergraduate grade point average and a GMAT score or a GRE score. We did some analysis at Darden with the enterprise analytics team to see what correlated with academic success in the first year of the MBA program. And before we introduced this new policy, we got some great insight from that analysis. And some of the things that we're in the process of learning are things like the interview correlated highly with academic success. The undergraduate GPA had a higher correlation than the GMAT or GRE. The GMAT and GRE do have a high correlation, but what we're learning is that there are other what we call alternative pieces of evidence that somebody can do well academically. So when COVID-19 hit, we were proudly the first school that pivoted and said, look, these test centers are closed around the world. We had done some preliminary analysis because we had been thinking about offering some greater flexibility or a test waiver. But our poor applicants were trying to apply in round 3 and couldn't take a standardized test, were really in a predicament. So we had done some research that showed that there is a correlation between SATs and ACTs. It's not as high as the GMAT or GRE, but there was a strong correlation. And so initially what we did is say, you can apply without GMAT or GRE, you can submit your SAT or ACT, because they were in a predicament and the test centers were closed down. We then found that some people who applied without a test likely would have been more successful if they did submit a test. To get back to your original question, who should apply for a waiver? I would only recommend applying for a waiver if you have tangible alternative evidence that you can do well academically at Darden. So what are some of those pieces of alternative evidence? It could be that an applicant has earned a CPA or their CFA. There are, in this day and age, so many online certification programs. We have Darden Coursera classes that people can take and get a grade and show, hey, I'm capable of doing really well in accounting. I'm personally a really big fan of HBS Online. It used to be called HBX Core, one of the first movers in terms of a credential program to expose people who were not business majors to basic business skills. It is offered by Harvard Business School. It is, I think, roughly $1,800. It takes about 150 hours, which is a big commitment when you're working full time, but I have never had an applicant say a negative thing about it. So many people have come back and said, thank you so much. Wharton has a credential program, I think Business Foundations is what it's called. So in this day and age, there are multiple ways to demonstrate alternative evidence. So if you have a strong GPA, that can be helpful. Typically, over 10% of our entering students have earned another master's degree. Maybe it's a quantitatively or analytically oriented master's degree. But we are continuing this policy is relatively new, and the first class that just came into Darden just finished their first year. So we were waiting for them to finish their first year and look at even more correlations. What correlates so we know what we can rely on in lieu of the GMAT or GRE. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but I wanted to just give a little bit of history on our thinking. And I would say, I would sum it up in the reason we did it is because there are some stellar applicants out there who have extraordinarily high leadership potential. And we feel that we're missing out on them. Some of them who may not be standardized test takers, but perform really well in classes or these credential programs. Maybe some of them have an analytically oriented job, and they can talk about that and the test waiver. So I would only recommend it if you have strong, compelling alternative evidence, or you're going to work on that evidence in lieu of taking the standardized tests. I would not worry that because they asked for a waiver that there is any negative consequences. This last year was the first year that we offered a waiver, and we were a little conservative in how many we granted. So because we wanted to be successful and we wanted to make sure that the people who were granted a waiver, that we felt really confident that they could do well. This year, because we're getting additional data to make the decisions, we're going to be a little bit more liberal with it. But in no way, we would never have a policy, the whole policy shift from going test flexibility and saying you don't need to submit a score, you can submit your SAT or ACT, to a waiver was because one of the mantras in our office is always do what's in the best interest of the applicant. And they fill out the waiver before they apply. They complete information on the waiver form that is then pre-populated into the application for admission. And we felt that telling them, yes, you are granted a waiver or no, you're not, is in their best interest. Because if they're granted a waiver, then we feel comfortable in terms of the academic portion of your application. We feel comfortable that a candidate has provided sufficient compelling alternative evidence. If they're not granted a waiver, that is in no way also indicative that they're not going to get admitted. It just means, we don't think that there's quite as much evidence to waive the GMAT, and we'd really like to have that additional piece of information. But there are no negative consequences. I just wouldn't, we all have limited time and energy in our lives. I wouldn't apply for it unless you have some pretty compelling evidence, or you're going to apply a little bit later and work on that compelling evidence, like take an HBX core or something. We usually like to see several different pieces of evidence that you can do well academically.
So I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about why we've implemented this waiver process in the first place. We heard from many candidates over the course of the past year about some of the struggles they've been having taking the test, and really just with life in general. It's been a very, very difficult last year or year and a half. And we know that the MBA admissions process is already very taxing. And so one of the reasons that we implemented the process was because we heard from candidates, and we adjusted our process actually mid-cycle last year in response to what we were hearing from candidates. Now, what we did last year was we actually implemented the process after round one, and we actually went back to our round one candidates and we said, if you have applied with the test score and you'd like your candidacy to be considered with the waiver, and you've been placed on the wait list, of which we waitlisted everyone or admitted them, but if you were on the wait list, you could have your candidacy re-reviewed with the test score pulled from the application profile for it to be a fair process throughout the year. And then going forward, we implemented the waiver process, which needed to be completed in advance of the round that you were applying. That process is very, very similar, if not nearly nearly the same as it was last year going into this next admission cycle. And that is, you apply for a waiver given a certain set of criteria that you are going to be able to provide to us. That includes showing us your undergraduate track record, showing us your professional experience, other elements that might be an expired GMAT or GRE test. The executive assessment could count towards this, maybe a CPA or CFA or other credentials that could give us confidence of your likelihood to be successful in the classroom. What we're looking for, in addition to those factors, is we're open to hearing your stories too. What was the situation that has led for you to apply for that waiver? And so this is giving candidates an opportunity to give us the context. Not everybody is facing the same circumstances or the same hardships. And so this gives an opportunity to share what you might be facing personally, in addition to the other elements that are going to give us understanding of your academic preparedness and readiness to be able to take the courses that you're going to take in the absence of having a standardized test score available. In terms of who should use that waiver, it depends, right? It's going to very much depend. We know there's people in situations where their Wi-Fi is unstable to be able to take a 4-hour-long exam, or they live in a situation where they don't have an at-home work environment that's as conducive to being able to take the test as other people may. So the answer is truly it depends. It's not if you have a certain background and if these things have happened to you. It's going to be based on your personal circumstances and assessment of whether, whether the test waiver is warranted for you. When the admissions committee reviews applications without waivers, we review everything else that we have. Without a standardized test score, we review everything else that we have to be able to evaluate your candidacy. It's just one piece that we don't have when we're trying to assess your academic readiness, preparedness, and ability to be successful in the MBA program. So it is not a negative indicator, partly because there's various circumstances that have led to candidates not applying with a test score. It could have been, again, maybe having a difficult situation at home environment or inconsistent Wi-Fi, things like that may have led to that. So we're not going to hold that against you, given that that's your personal circumstance that's leading to you applying for the waiver. That said, for candidates who are in a position to be able to take a test, it certainly can be additive to your candidacy. It's one more data point that we have to be able to evaluate candidates. And if it's something that you're able to submit, it could very well be the factor that helps us understand whether you are to be admitted or not. So keep in mind there's a difference between receiving a waiver and being admitted, right? There's a lot of people that might receive a waiver, but it's still a very competitive process to get admitted. So we still need that confidence that you're going to be successful, and we are still evaluating your candidacy against others that are applying in that admissions cycle. Another question that we receive is, am I eligible for a scholarship if I apply for a waiver? And the answer is yes. Again, going back to different circumstances are leading to candidates applying for the waiver, and we're taking that into consideration. And we still want the best candidates to attend Michigan Ross, and so scholarship will still be considered. For context, the incoming MBA class this fall, about 15 to 20% of the class is coming in on a waiver. So 80 to 85% did take the test of those who are admitted. So it is not to say that your chances are less. It's just for you to assess for yourself whether the test is something that you are prepared and able to take, and use that to complement your candidacy.